Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
Welcome back to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Executive Director, William Wolfe, and I am very honored to be joined today by a special guest, Dr. Willy Rice. Dr. Rice, if it's okay with you, I'm going to call you Willie for this podcast.
Yeah, that's what my friends call me, so I'm glad to be called by that.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Willie. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to talk to you and appreciate the opportunity just to kind of share some perspective and story. I've been a Baptist pastor for actually this year, 40 years. I hit a 40-year anniversary and 20 years here at Calvary Baptist Church in Clearwater, Florida. And so just, have been a guy who's given my life. And as a pastor, it's all I really wanted to do from an early age. And by God's grace, I've been able to spend my life doing it and have enjoyed pastoring. It's what I feel called to do and have been able to do it in a Southern Baptist context and also been really privileged to have a lot of opportunities to serve in Southern Baptist life and get to know people. And I love the Southern Baptist Convention. It's my family. It's my extended tribe. And I'm grateful for it.
Well, that's fantastic. Congratulations on 40 years. That's quite an accomplishment. And, the Southern Baptist Convention is a family, and with family comes good things and hard things and, difficult discussions sometimes throughout the years. But you've got a really fascinating story to tell. Before we dive into it, though, why don't you also just tell us a little bit about some of the ways you have served in the Southern Baptist Convention?
Oh yeah, you hit these markers like 20 years at Calvary, 40 years. You live a long time, and the Lord is good, and you just see these milestones pile up. But through the years, I was able to serve president of our state convention here in Florida. Back a couple years ago, I've served as the president of the Pastors Conference, Southern Baptist Life, also Florida convention, been really involved in our state convention, been chairman of the nominating committee and on the committee on committees. I always get those mixed up, but I chaired one of them. I think it was a nominating committee at one year, and I was a trustee at NAM for a few years. So I've had, a number of opportunities that I'm very grateful for and met some wonderful people along the way.
Well, thank you for your service, Willie. We appreciate it. And one of the things that maybe you were going to do in terms of serving the Southern Baptist Convention was be the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And that didn't happen. And through the series of events surrounding that, you've had quite a perspective shift on a lot of things in the Southern Baptist Convention. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's a fair way to put it.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you on here today to talk about how your perspective has shifted on a variety of things, from the abuse reform efforts to the conversations surrounding critical race theory and wokeness in the convention and the different sort of factions in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm glad to have Willie on here today. And look, the truth is that Willie's going to say some things that I think people are going to think goes too far. He might say some things that people think don't go far enough. But I think the point of this conversation, and what I hope to accomplish here with Dr. Rice, is that we tell the truth. Telling the truth is one of the most courageous things, important things any man can do. I know Dr. Rice believes that. And what his story, I think, is very critical for Southern Baptist messengers, pastors, lay members right now at this point in time in our convention. So with that, Willie, why don't you begin walking us through the story, beginning back to when you were going to be nominated for Southern Baptist Convention president and what happened then?
Well, yeah, it's quite a story. And, I tell you, William, it's been 2 years. It was 2 years ago this spring. It's probably one of the worst things, the hardest seasons I've ever been through. And hey, nobody needs to feel sorry for me. God's been awful good to me, and I've got more blessings than I've ever deserved. And I hope anything I say today, I'm not I don't want to come across as an angry person. I'm not embittered. I don't think I was owed anything. I don't want to be that person. I've prayed about that very, very hard. And so I'm not motivated by rancor or bitterness or vengeance or anything like that. I just, as you said it, I think the experiences that I went through shifted some of my perspective in ways that, I don't know, I think might encourage other pastors, or at least might just be part of a conversation. And it's hard because I know I have friendships on both sides of some of these issues that are deep and abiding, and maybe lost some of them. I don't know. Hope not. Maybe some people, you worry about what people think about you sometimes. But I've been blessed with a lot of good friends, but these are hard things to talk about. This was a hard thing to go through. 2 years ago. So the story is, and I really don't know that I've shared it ever that publicly. So I appreciate the opportunity to do it. It's about 2 years ago. It's the spring of 22. And maybe the end of the year 21, there were a lot of questions about whether or not Ed Litton was the president then. And Ed was a friend and is a friend. We probably see some of these things different today, but I do love Ed and Kathy, and I think they feel the same about me. But back in those days, I was talking to Ed a good bit. I know he was struggling with whether or not to run for re-election. As you know, there were some things that had come up that made his presidency a little bit problematic and difficult for him. So there were concerns that would be maybe the overshadowing factor as you go into the convention that next year, which was going to be in Anaheim. And so Ed was praying that. There were a lot of, as you know, in the SBC, there's a lot of backroom calls that go on among pastors. And so there was a lot of conversation. Ed was struggling with it, praying with it. I know he took it seriously. And ultimately, he came to a conclusion that he shouldn't run again, that the best thing would be for him to just serve one term. And I think just didn't want that next convention to be all about him and some of the issues that had taken place there. And I don't think Ed would mind me saying, I hope not. I have no desire to betray a confidence here. But, in those conversations, at some point, Ed said, hey, if I don't run, I really want you to run. And I know, by the way, Clint Presley was thinking about running then. He kind of actually started some of that, called me one day and asked me what I was thinking. But anyway, at some point, Ed goes, hey, I think you ought to run. And of course, that's, sobering and humbling. I prayed hard, talked to Cheryl. It was a big thing. I talked to other leaders in the SBC, just the kind of thing you think somebody would do. I'm sure same thing that all the guys running now have. You got some friends that tell you first time you think they're crazy, and then 2 or 3 say it, and you go, okay, maybe, and you start talking to people. And I talked to some of the former presidents, some of the leaders, and guys most anybody know. And there was a sense of encouragement to do it. And so when Ed did announce that he was pulling out, I pretty quickly jumped right in. Like, I knew it was coming. He kind of gave me a heads up. And that was kind of a strategic move. So I think he announced he was withdrawing on a Tuesday, and I jumped in before the week was over. And so we were going to run. And as a lot of people know, it didn't work out too well. I think I was in it for about 4 weeks or something. And something of I don't know if you call it a scandal or a crisis or a difficulty arose. When it came to light that there was a leader in our church, a congregational leader, not a pastor, not a paid leader, but a congregational leader, a deacon, had an incident of immorality and sin in his past. I have no intention of trying to make light of that. I'm not looking for words that minimize it. It was a sinful act that had happened, I think 17, 18 years before. He wasn't at our church. I didn't know him. He, some years after that, came to our church. His testimony was that he had been saved. And over time, we watched his life. He gave every evidence of repentance. He was not a criminal. He hadn't broken any laws, even though what he did broke God's law. But he was not somebody that you were on a watch list or anything like that. And over time, we just saw our church did this was a brother who seemed to give every evidence of repentance, and he was very devout. He's still a very devout man, serves the Lord. He's not at our church anymore, but he runs a nonprofit doing some great work. And he was zealous for the Lord. And in time, our church, right or wrong, we got criticized for it, but in time, he was made a deacon at our church. We never had any problem. He was honestly just an outstanding person in his life. But what he had done 17, 18 years before was not. It was terrible. And he never hid it. It was not something that he hid. It wasn't something we talked about all the time. I probably hadn't thought about it in a decade when it came out. And that story would take a whole podcast in and of itself. But the bottom line is, when that came to light, and there was a lot of pressure, it was coming to light. So I made a statement, and it kind of became public. And so there was a lot of pressure then. And I pretty quickly realized I didn't want to stay in this. It was going to hurt people. It was going to hurt people in his family. It was going to hurt people in our church. And I didn't really anticipate that ever being a part of it. And remember, William, it was also the year that the Guidepost report had not yet come out. It was going to come out in May. I knew that was going to land 2 weeks or so before the convention. I didn't know what was going to be in it, but I knew that was going to be the dominant issue going into Anaheim. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to, spend the next 2 years trying to justify something or debate something. I didn't want to put somebody through that who hadn't signed up for it. He wanted no part of being this national story. And in the end, I just realized, hey, it probably wasn't the right thing for me to do. And I stepped out pretty quickly. And that's okay. That's just a story. It happens. I trust in the providence of God, and, it's okay. Things happen. I joke with people. I grew up a Florida Gator fan, so I know all about disappointment. I've lived with disappointment, and, that's just, some things don't work out the way you want. God is good. God's been very good to me. But I think the reason maybe we want to talk is that in the months after it happened, I reflected back on some things I experienced in the brief time of running for president, when I had people advising me, say this, don't say that, do this, don't do that. That I just kind of filed away in my heart. And when it was all over, there were a lot of people blaming this guy and that guy and so forth. But when I looked back on it, I started connecting some dots. And it was one of those moments it's like if you've ever watched a movie and there's a mystery, and at the end you see the mystery and it changes the whole movie. Mm-hmm. It was like when I started connecting some dots, I went, wow, maybe that didn't go down the way I thought it was going to go down. Maybe I didn't understand the issues I thought I understood. And it kind of led me to an epiphany of sorts. It led me to some private conversations. Bottom line is, it ended up changing the way I view a number of things. And it certainly ended up changing the way I think about the sexual abuse reform movement in the SBC.
Yeah. So on that point, I think that's the really important thing for us to get into. And now, in terms of, when that, well, obviously, we thank you for sharing, and we want to be respectful of this individual in your congregation. As that was about to come to light, was there anything even in how that process went down, some of the people you talked to through that was helping sort of change your perspective in terms of maybe some of the folks that would have been on the other side of things treating you better in that than some of the people who were supposed to be your friends?
Yeah, that came kind of in the months later when you kind of start putting things together. I think, in the moment, everybody knows. One of the reasons and I think this is an important story to tell. It may feel like a little detour, but I think it's important. One of the reasons I think people encouraged me to run was I had written some things, not a huge stuff, but I'd written some stuff about a personal story in my own family's life that goes back decades, where I had, and I don't want to get into that story too much because it's their story to tell, but it's been out there. But I had two nieces in my family, and very close family. They were molested by a director of missions in a South Alabama association. That person, this is all a matter of record. So we're not saying anything that isn't on the record that anybody couldn't research. He had worked for the IMB for 20 years before that. He was a pedophile. He was a classic pedophile predator. He eventually got convicted and went to jail, but not before this. And the incident that happened there, I mean, this young family, and I would have been in my young 30s when this happened, and they were about that age, early 90s, I think. They were treated very badly. It was clear that people did not know how to handle this. When they spoke up and brought this to light, which is exactly what they should have done, we would both encourage anybody to do that. People didn't know how to handle it. They didn't handle it very well at all. Even the IMB, they've acknowledged they didn't handle it very well. Local association, state convention. So it was a terrible thing, really. And he eventually did get arrested and did go to jail. So it's one of those classic cases. To me, it was almost like an Exhibit A case for sexual abuse reform in the SBC. So when the moment came in the SBC, Houston Chronicle article and all that came out of that, I was one of those guys going, this needs to happen. I'll tell you, I thought this was a good thing. I thought, man, it's about time. And I thought my niece's story should have been maybe Exhibit A of like, hey, this is what can happen if we don't do the right thing. And here's some lessons we can learn so this doesn't happen again. So I was gung-ho in the sexual abuse reform movement. I mean, 100%. And when I heard people kind of slow walking it or expressing reservations, I just was impatient with that. I was a guy like, come on. This is an easy one. We've got to deal with this. So I think it's one of the reasons people encouraged me to run for president. And it's one of the reasons I was willing to do it. I kind of thought, hey, it's a full circle moment. Maybe I can, at this point in my life, be a part of helping us land this plane, solve this problem. So I think that's an important part of this story of why I was predisposed to sexual abuse reform movement is a good thing. It needs to happen. There were a couple of times I would hear statements and I'd go, I wouldn't have done that, or I wish they hadn't said that, but I excused it. I always looked the other way and went, but the movement justifies everything else. The end justifies the means. And your question goes to what happened and what did I wake up and see? And there were a couple of moments that, as I reflect back on it, when I was running for president, that I just had aha moments. And I didn't connect the dots all at once. But later, when I reflected and kind of did a post, went back and looked at it, I thought, well, this isn't adding up. And I'll tell you two of them, if I can.
Yeah, please.
One of them was, this was before any controversy. I was announced as a candidate. We didn't know who else was going to run then. They got, I don't know how many, 6, 7 guys now, who knows. Before the day's over, might have a few more. But then I was just the only guy. And the rumor was, now Tom Askell eventually announced and ran, but he hadn't done that yet. And the rumor for a couple of days was that Vody Baucham was going to run for president of SBC. Now, he ended up being nominated for president of the Pastors Conference that year. Didn't get elected. But for about 10 days, everybody was going like, who's the other side going to run? I don't even like to talk other side, but that's what people were thinking, Sure. And Vody Baucham's name was getting floated a lot. And, there were a lot of questions. Is Vody even qualified to run? Is he a member of Southern Baptist? There were a lot of questions floating around. And but for a few days, everybody thought that's what's going to happen. Well, during that time, there was a Baptist News Global, which is a news service, and I think is a left-leaning news service.
That's a generous way to describe them.
Okay,
yes.
That's a generous way to describe them. Yeah. And I never read them. I didn't know much about them. But they ran what I would describe as a hit piece on Vody Baucham. He hadn't even announced yet, but it was like a hit piece. It accused him of misogyny, patriarchy, every word they could throw at him, and almost really accused him of enabling abusive behaviors. And it was embarrassing to read, in my opinion. And it was grossly unfair. And I did not want any part of that. I wanted to separate myself from that kind of talk. I was hoping to elevate the conversation in the convention. And I certainly want people to know that is not the way. I don't know Vody personally. I have heard him preach on a number of occasions, read books, been blessed by his ministry, but we don't have a personal relationship. So I wrote an article defending Vody Bakum. I said, look, folks, we don't need to have this kind of conversation. We don't need to slander one another. This is not what I want to be a part of. We're brothers in Christ. Vody has had a long, fruitful ministry. And if we have to have conversations about the SBC, I look forward to having it as two godly men. It was that kind of a thing. And put it out there. And so for a couple of days, William, everybody praised it. Like I got, all these attaboys. Everybody was like, oh, that's what we need. That's the kind of statesmanship. I even had a guy who was on the steering council of the CBN call me and said, man, thank you for that article. Man, I hope nobody else runs against you. He said, I hope you'll get, and because that's the kind of leadership we need, and so on and so forth. So I thought, hey, this is going to be pretty easy. But it wasn't. I got a call on a Friday morning. I remember it well. And it was Ed. Ed Litton called me, and Ed said, hey, how are you doing? I said, I'm great. He said, well, maybe not so much after this call. And I said, well, what's up? He said, you'll get used to this. People, you say things and people misunderstand what you say, sort of thing. And I'm sure that's true. But he said, your Vody Bakum article, he said, the survivors community is really upset about that. Well, that just stunned me. I mean, it was like out of left field. I go like, well, that article, first of all, it was pretty basic. There's not anything controversial in the article. It was just saying, hey, let's all behave like Christians kind of thing. They said, no, they're really upset about it because they just don't like Vody, and they feel like he contributes to a climate that enables abuse. And I was just stunned. Like I went, well, the article had nothing to do about abuse. I said nothing about sexual abuse. And Vody hadn't said anything about anything, in this whole context. He was quiet. I said, why is anybody upset? He said, well, you'll get used to this. You got to kind of understand how to relate to this group, and maybe you ought to talk to JD and he can help you figure out how to, we all learn to navigate through this. And so I just thought, well, okay. He said, maybe some of them think you could issue a retraction or a clarification, back up from Vody. And I said, I'm not going to do that. That's silly. Listen, tell them I'm their friend. I'm the guy that wants to help them. Remember, I'm the guy running to help them. He said, I know. We're telling them that. But you just got to understand, they view everything through a single prism. And they feel like Vody represents all the things that enable abuse, and which I just thought was ridiculous. And, but I said, well, okay, thank you for the information. I'm sure it'll pass over. And I filed that away. So that's one thing.
Willie, can I ask you a quick question there?
Yep.
So, that's fascinating, right? And it's quite an insight into this quote unquote survivor community. And at least in some ways, how some of them really want to control a message, control the words that come out of other people's mouths. Of course, Vody has never done anything to enable abuse. That's ridiculous. But
it is.
When you say survivor community, can you, is there any more light you can shine on who that is in the SBC, or what that means for some people to understand it and place it at this time?
Rachel Den Hollander is obviously the name. Who is the strongest personality at that time. Mm-hmm. I was talking to people who were talking to her because I had not yet met her. I was looking forward to meeting her. When her story came out, I thought she was a hero. I remember I read her book like the weekend it came out. I thought, man, I hope I get to meet her one day. And eventually I did, and it wasn't so pleasant, but it was a hard meeting. But at the time, I thought, I look forward to meeting her. I want to be a great help. I want to be a guy who can steward this movement. So I'm not putting all the blame on her. I don't know all the names, but, there is a group of survivors, and it's a relatively, I think, small group. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's a small group. And it's kind of like, you hear about civil rights activists. Maybe somebody will say, I speak for all Black Americans. And, no, you don't. Or somebody will say, I speak for all this group. And no, you really don't. There is a group of survivors that have been given a platform in the SBC, and they are very loud on social media, and they have a lot of influence behind the scenes. I learned that in a short period of time. They have undue influence, And I don't think they represent all survivors. I know they don't represent all survivors. There's survivors whose names I can give you who would be quick to say they don't represent my position at all. But there is a small group, and I think they're very influential. I don't know right now how involved Rachel is or not, but I know that there are a number of survivors, and I can tell you, in my opinion, SBC leaders are afraid of them. I'll tell you, in my opinion, they are afraid of them in the sense that you don't want to get on the wrong side of it. I was told, maybe this is too much information for this, but what the heck? Here we are talking. At one time, I was told, hey, there are two people you cannot get mad at you. Rachel Den Hollander and Ben Cole. You cannot get those two people mad at you. Don't cross them. And I was like, I got no interest in crossing them. Like, what am I going to do to cross them? But that was one of those things I also later reflected on, because I was told that by a pretty high level leader. And I later reflected on it to go, you know what? If SBC leaders are tiptoeing around people like that, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, just they have their personalities, they have their corners. But if SBC leaders are intimidated like that, then we got a problem. We have a problem. And so I have no desire to fight with either one of those people, but I don't think either one of them like me. So, there you go.
Sure.
Anyway, that was the Vody Bacham episode. Okay. There was a second episode that was really telling. So it was after the controversy kind of hit. And so I was trying to figure out the statement that I was going to make to just kind of clarify it and go on the record. And I was trying to talk about how Calvary's taken this seriously at our church for many years. And we have. And we had a group called Ministry Safe. They're well known nationally. They probably have trained more churches in sexual abuse prevention, maybe than anybody. Certainly, they're a nationally known name. So that's why I mentioned them. A lot of people know them, and they're very good. We brought them in years ago to our staff. I remember a staff member telling me, we got to do this, and we got to train all of our volunteers. And so we had, and it was a lot of training, William. I mean, he said, we're going to have every employee from 8 to 4. They got to clear the counter. They're going to be here. Well, we got if you had our school in, we have a large high school. I mean, you had our school in and part-time, full-time. I mean, it was like 250, 300 people. And we stayed there all day, including me, all day. And I thought, oh, man, I'm going to be so tired after this seminar, giving it all day. And I got to tell you, it was fantastic. The lawyer who came out, it's a lady named Kimberly Norris. She was absolutely incredible. I learned more that day about sexual abuse and sexual abuse prevention I had ever learned in my life. It was just riveting. I got to tell you, I was so glad we did it. Then on Saturday, all of our volunteers had to come. And I just mentioned it. So I just throw that out to say, I'm writing and saying, hey, Calvary's used this training. And a guy who was trying to help me and kind of was a liaison to Rachel said, hey, you can't mention Ministry Safe. And he even apologized. He said, you would have no way of knowing that, but you can't mention him. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, the survivors don't like that group. I was like, well, according to who? Like that made no sense to me. This is an organization which has trained. This is a woman, I think, if I remember, Norris served as a prosecutor and prosecuted many, many people, I think. I know she's a lawyer, but I believe she was involved in prosecuting many, many sexual abusers. It was kind of like a specialty almost. And now I know this, it's a law firm and they do a lot of work in training churches and, again, to prevent abuse. And it was just so enlightening about how predators work and how abuse works. And I mean, it was unbelievable. And I was just mystified. These are Baptist people. These are Christian people. They have this national firm helping churches prevent abuse. And I can't mention them. And he said, yeah, the survivors don't think they're survivor centric enough. And I said, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't understand this. I thought we're in this together. I thought we're trying to stop child abuse. And he goes, no, he said, you see, they help churches. They train churches. Their ministries, they're trying to help churches. And that's viewed kind of like negatively, like, they help churches too much, and it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, I mean, what they were trying to say is they help churches instead of survivors. Well, that was nonsense. They're helping churches stop people from being abused. And by the way, they've helped many survivors. They're a fantastic law firm. I recommend them tremendously. And we continue to use their training for all of our volunteers. All of our people at Calvary have to go through ministry safe training. And so I filed that one away, William. Now, I tell you those two long stories for a reason. I went in thinking this was going to be about stopping child sexual abuse. Like, that's what how can anybody be against that? Let's stop predators and let's stop sexual abuse. And what I quickly learned in those two stories, as I connected the dots, is this was about a whole lot more than that. This was an agenda that is a lot bigger than helping churches stop abuse and minister to survivors. And I had a moment when I was thinking back with one of my staff members on this about the ministry safe moment. I said, I just don't understand. These people should be allies. And my associate said, when the people you think are the good guys tell you that the people you know are good guys, that they're bad guys, then maybe the people you think are the good guys aren't the good guys. Mm. And it was like, that was like somebody slapping me in the face. And I thought, wow, you're right. And I just began to go back and question my assumptions. And I began to pull a thread on a garment, mm-hmm. and the whole thing started coming apart. And what I ended up with is a conclusion, which may be very unpopular today. I don't know, but I hope people are waking up to see it, is that the problem with the sexual abuse reform movement in the Southern Baptist Convention is that it's about a lot more than sexual abuse reform. Mm. If it were about sexual abuse reform, if this were only about stopping predators, helping children, giving churches training and equipping, there would be no controversy. Like, no one would oppose that. And think of all that we could have done in the last 2 or 3 years with the money we have spent, with the resources we have allocated in getting churches better tools to fight this fight. It's a real fight because it's a human problem. It's a human problem. I don't think our churches are cesspools of abuse. I don't think there is like systematic organizational cover up. That is not true.
Or that there's an apocalypse of abuse being hidden at the executive committee.
That's absolute. It's just not true. It's just not true. But is it a human problem? Of course it's a human problem. And could our churches do better? I 100% believe we can always do better. And I want to stop every predator I can and protect every child I can. And I think 99.99% of Southern Baptist pastors would feel exactly the same way. The problem is this movement became about much, much more. And that's what's caused the division. I used the line in a thing I wrote when I explained that I was going to nominate Mike Stone last year is, I think instead of uniting Southern Baptists to attack a problem, this became a movement to divide Southern Baptists into attacking each other. Hmm. And that's where we're at, and that's what has happened. And the tragedy is not just that we're attacking each other now, and people have been slandered, people have been hurt, innocent people have been targeted, lies have been told. That's not even the biggest problem. The biggest tragedy is that we could have done so much more to actually help churches stop abuse if we had kept our eye on the ball. Mm-hmm. But this got hijacked and turned into something much, much different. And that's become my perspective. And I know some people won't like to hear it, but that's my perspective. And so anyway, I thank you for the chance to share it.
Well, for sure. Thank you, Willie. That's really important. And I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of people can see that and they can sense it. And some people are beginning to put the pieces together as well. And so those two stories, the response to Voti, and then obviously the response to Ministry Safe, which again is an incredible tool for equipping churches to prevent abuse, which is what we want, right? We want to
exactly.
equip churches to prevent abuse, and we also want to equip churches to respond appropriately, biblically, and in a just fashion to allegations of abuse, right? And that involves going to local law enforcement, and it also involves caring for those who have been allegedly abused and then perhaps actually have been abused, and certainly want to care for those. It also involves biblical justice, involves caring for those who are potentially allegedly falsely accused as well, and making sure that due process exists. But when you say that the sexual abuse reform efforts in the Southern Baptist Convention is about a lot more, and it's been hijacked by other agendas. What are some of those? What do you think the more is here? I mean, you kind of gave us what the outcome has been, which is instead of uniting Southern Baptists to fight a problem, it's divided Southern Baptists to fight ourselves. But maybe you can help us understand what some of the more is to the agenda that Christians should be concerned about.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there is somebody sitting in an office who is a conspiratorialist who planned everything. But I will say this. We do have a spiritual enemy who is a conspiratorialist. And we need to take that very seriously. We have an enemy, we battle not flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And we have a spiritual enemy who is quite capable of putting things in place that enough deception here, enough deception there, and it does create a crisis, and it does create a trap that deceives and moves us off center. If you ask me what the big objective is, I think I've come to believe really that there is an objective of stopping the nation's largest biblical conservative denomination. I think this was like a perfect storm. This was how to knock this huge, the largest in America, as you know, bulwark of biblical conservatism off center. And I think if you listen close enough, that's exactly what you hear some people saying. It became, again, I know people aren't going to agree with what I say, but I think it became a mechanism to basically undo the conservative resurgence that took place in the latter part of the 20th century. It became a perfect vehicle to take out certain leaders. It became, some of whom had done some things wrong, some of whom just should have handled some situations better, and some of whom I think have been really badly treated. But it became a way of taking out some leaders. I think it became a way of neutralizing some really strong biblical conservative leaders and moving us in a much more leftist direction. And I think that is, I don't think most pastors who have been involved in this and trying to do sexual abuse reform meant to do that. Most of them don't even know they're doing it. But I do think that is the aim of this. I think it's undoing the conservative resurgence and moving us off of our biblical convictions into a more social justice pursuit and off of what Southern Baptists are supposed to be about.
Well, that's fascinating. I think you're right. And I think if I were to use a sort of a brief term to describe a lot of what the more is, it's the Me Too movement, right? So it was there's incidences of abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention life, as there is in every human institution. I mean, go look at what's happening in public schools. It's an actual crisis there. But of course, I think that it was really, I think it was truly exaggerated. Mark Coppinger has done some data-driven studies to show how low the actual incidents are in Southern Baptist life compared to how big of an organization we are. And it came right around the same time as the Me Too movement was crashing over the United States of America. And then obviously you get things like Brett Kavanaugh's hearing and the allegations against him. And again, the Me Too movement is about so much more than just caring for victims of abuse. It's about tearing down the hierarchy. It's about, really bringing men down, painting men as fundamentally untrustworthy. There's this nexus of attack on authority in the church being vested by God in men, right? That goes right along with this. And really that phrase, believe all women, which just is not something we can accept as Christians at all. And so it was the entry point of the radical Me Too movement into the Southern Baptist Convention that really hijacked what should have been something we united on to fight.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating concept. And I'd like to just say something on that. When the Me Too movement first hit, my first thought was, good. Hey, You got some of these, these Hollywood people who have been living just live debauchery and abuse for years. Like when Melissa Milano calls out Harvey Weinstein, I'm like, hey, drag every one of them into the light of day. And there was a part of me, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it now, but there was a part of me going, hey, maybe this could be a beginning of an awakening. Maybe people in Hollywood are recognizing that the sexual ethic they have promoted, that, by the way, we're the ones who have stood against, but the sexual ethic they have promoted actually harms women and children. And maybe they're beginning to see it. There was a part of me like, maybe they're waking up. Well, quickly we realized this was not a moral movement. And you realize it in the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, which, the details on that probably better than I do. But, that was a sham. It was a clear hit job. It was a clear case where there was zero corroborating evidence. And it just was, it was heartbreaking to watch. And in that hearing, Alyssa Milano came and, was sitting behind Brett Kavanaugh. In other words, this was the Me Too movement and the apex of it. I also think it was the end of it, because there she is. Now, Alyssa Milano is also, and she's the one that I think brought the first accusation, kind of started it, is also a huge pro-abortion activist, as you know. And, I said one time, look, Alyssa Milano is not the answer to Harvey Weinstein. What is the difference between a person like Harvey Weinstein, who uses his power to prey upon vulnerable women, and someone like Alyssa Milano, who uses her power to kill unborn babies? Both of those are monsters. They're both monsters. And this is what you see in social justice movements. If you've studied the French Revolution, if you've studied Marxist movements, most revolutions fail because they aren't about a biblical justice at all. It's about revenge. It's about getting even. It's about vengeance. It's about, you have what I want and I'm going to hurt you, or I'm going to use the government to get you. And that's where most human justice movements fail. Maybe all of them fail. Is because they're really not about justice, are they? They're about vengeance. They're about greed. They're about power. And the moment you saw Milano sitting behind Brett Kavanaugh, you knew this movement was about power and keeping him out of power, because really it comes down to abortion there. And to me, the fact that many people have used the Church Too moniker to describe what is happening tells you everything you need to know. That is a movement that isn't based on biblical justice. It's based on a human idea, sometimes called social justice. But what that means is just justice in the eye of the beholder. That's no justice at all. That's just revenge and working itself out in public life. And it only creates more and more victims, and it never heals anything. Never heals anything. So I do think that's very insightful, that when it's basically the Me Too movement. The Southern Baptist Convention got the Brett Kavanaugh treatment. What happened in the last 4 years? We got the Brett Kavanaugh treatment, and probably for the same reason.
Yeah, well, I think that's really well said, and I want to pull on a couple of things there and then circle back. It's it's very hard for people to hear things like that comparison you just made between, say, Harvey Weinstein and Alyssa Milano, because if I don't remember all the details of that story, but if Alyssa Milano was one of the people who was abused by Harvey Weinstein, then she truly is a victim in that case.
Absolutely.
And a horrible wrong has been done to her, and she deserves justice for that. And yet this is one of those other ideological things that have been smuggled in, which is the idea that somebody who has been victimized and wronged can never actually also be a victim, a perpetrator themselves. Right. Yeah. And so, and we know, according to biblical anthropology, that we can both be wronged and be victims, and we can also be the wrongdoers and be perpetrators of great offenses. And the fact that we've been sinned against does not justify or excuse us from sinning against others, whether that's by doing something like advocating for abortion on the public scale, or by lying about other people, or by seeking revenge on them, et cetera. And that's so hard for so many, I think, in the survivor community to hear. And that's one of those sort of unbiblical assumptions we've adopted, which is if you have been wronged or sinned against, everything you say from here on out is essentially unquestionable.
Right.
Right.
Well, that is the assumption, and it's a bad assumption. As you know, most of the people who hurt others are people who have already been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like everybody can say, I justify what I'm doing because I've been hurt. I'm a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everybody has suffered at some point, and many people have suffered grievously.
Mm-hmm.
But that does not justify us acting in ways that are contrary to the will and the character of God. And it will not heal us. Vengeance never healed anybody. It just never did. That's why, justice is a good thing, and we should work for justice, and we should want justice in human affairs. But when our pursuit of justice really is just vengeance in disguise, it's not going to heal you, and it's just going to create more and more victims, and it always does.
Yeah. So Willie, this is fascinating, very good sort of philosophical and biblical conversation, but to try to bring it back to your personal story a little bit, when we think of the fact that we have Willy Rice here saying today that the SBC got the Brett Kavanaugh treatment, when if you rolled the clock back 2 years ago, you're on the front lines of beginning to try to, go after pursuing these reforms. And so, you realized with the Voti issue, with the ministry staff issue, were there some other things that would be helpful as other Southern Baptist pastors and messengers are thinking through? How do I really think about the state of the Southern Baptist Convention, these abuse reform efforts, the survivor community, any other dots in that reflection time after you stopped running, or any conversations with individuals that kind of help bring you to where you are now? Because it is such a drastic change. And I think our hope is that your story helps a lot of other Southern Baptist pastors sort of make the same transition.
Yeah, after I just kind of withdrew after that, it's very painful. It's honestly, you still think about it a lot. It's embarrassing. Never been through anything like that. Never thought I'd go through anything like that. But, it happens. And as the months went by and I began to think, I began to go, I'd like to talk to some people for some reason. I started having these thoughts. I'm starting to connect these dots. And for some reason, I thought, I want to talk to some of the people I thought were on the other side of me, like that I'd heard had horns and a tail, and they were trying to tear down the Southern Baptist. And I thought they were critics and just negative people. And maybe I didn't have, a terrible view of them. I just didn't know them. And I just kind of viewed them as on the other side. And one of those guys was Tom Askell, because he was going to run, at some point he was going to run against me. And when everything hit, by the way, in like social media, and of course, and you may know a little about this, it just is there's critics, there's a torrent, and most of them, I didn't read them, so I never read them to this day. But, for a couple of days, you just got to stay off of things. But a lot of those came from the people I thought would be, my friends. I tell people I got run over by an SBC bus. What surprised, but that's, that happens to a lot of people. But what surprised me was who was driving the doggone thing when it happened. When the picture got developed and I'd say, hey, who's really driving this? That's what kind of surprised me. And so I went and sat down. Tom Askell and I had a lunch down there. We live in the same state. We just never known one another, gotten to know one another. And I went and sat down with him. And we had lunch at a Cracker Barrel of all places. And I was kind of still pretty raw at this point. And he was so gracious. And we sat there and I said, Tom, it's great to meet you. Can I just process some of my thoughts? Just put it on the table. What happened here? And he was like, I don't know. He was so kind. And let me tell you, I've gotten to know Tom since then. And Tom is bold. Tom is strong. Tom has a prophetic voice, I think, in our convention. I've grown to really love and admire Tom Askell. But he is so kind. He is just a kind and gracious person, gentle. And we were talking, and he was just like an older brother, really. And I don't mean to insult him by saying maybe a few years older than I am, but just a few. And he was like an older brother, just letting me connect the dots. He didn't force feed me anything. He didn't rant or rave. He didn't say, I told you so. He could have probably. He just listened and kind of helped me process. And I just walked away from that going, wow, that guy's not a bad guy. Like I was told he was a critic. Like he's one of the guys that needs to be marginalized in so many words. In the seats of power that I was in, guys like that, in so many words, we got to ignore them. Don't pay attention to them. And I went, that's a smart guy. Like, we ought to be paying attention to him. I had a conversation with Mike Stone a little bit after that. I had known Mike Stone, but I've gotten to know Mike Stone. We've talked a bunch of times. I was told he was just a terrible person and, hard to get along with and blah, blah, blah. And, man, I called Mike and I began to talk with him about things he's been through. And he helped me see some of the things he's been through. And my goodness, if there's a guy in the Southern Baptist Convention that is owed an apology, and I hope, I want to say this publicly. If there's a guy that a lot of people ought to go to and say, we owe you an apology, it's Mike Stone. And I got a lot of flack for nominating last year. And that's, I understand it was the sitting president and, we always reelect sitting presidents and all that. But I was honored when Mike asked me, and I knew it would send a signal to a lot of people if I went and nominated him. I knew I would get a lot of flack for that. And I did. I got a lot of my friends, people that I love, calling me. It was almost as bad as the year before, because I had a lot of people call me going, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind? One guy said, hey, you've really ripped your britches now. I mean, you are done in the SBC. And I thought later, I said, I like the fresh air. We need a little fresh air, so I'm not going to worry about it. And
Willie, let me pause you there real quick for a second, because again, to just try to bring people along through your mental processes. Sure. So how do you go from you get this lunch with Tom Askell, which I know Tom, I'm not at all surprised to hear that's how he was with you. And, I think it's truly unfortunate the way Tom is treated in the Southern Baptist Convention by many of the power brokers. Then you have a lunch with Mike Stone. But so how do you go from lunch with Tom Askell, lunch to Mike Stone, to doing something as public as sort of really changing your allegiance? I mean, I'll use a crude analogy, but every now and then you get a politician. These days, it's usually one of the Democrats who says, I'm a Republican now. And that's always a big thing. And again, just to use that, it's like, so you go from being essentially Ed Litton's requested successor to nominating Mike Stone. So what happened there? How did that come about?
Well, it's just you connect the dots.
Why did you do that, I guess, is really the question.
I think I felt burdened and grieved about what was happening in the sexual abuse reform movement. And then I thought, I'm in a unique situation here. I'll tell you, another part of that was the decision in this early part of the year when there was a recommendation from the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force to recommend that we continue to use Guidepost. And I was talking to Tom during those times, and that just hit me. I mean, it just floored me. It was like I had started connecting the dots to go, okay, something more is going on here. And then when that happened, and the controversy with the Guidepost, that they had a very public tweet, affirming and celebrate. I think it was to celebrate and affirm LGBTQ values. Now, I can give people a pass to go, hey, they hired him first time. It's a secular organization. Secular organizations have secular values. And I had a lot of people, that's no big deal. It's like flying Delta. It's like buying a Coke, buying an iPhone, whatever. But it's not like buying an iPhone or a Coke. You're paying someone in an investigatory role, which implies a judgmental role on implicitly moral issues. Mm-hmm. So let's make it clear. We're not buying a Coca-Cola here. But I could give you a pass. Hey, the first time you don't know what you're dealing with. And that they surprised them at the very end, because they had that tweet like in June, right before after they released the report. But now this is like 8 months later. So you know exactly who you're dealing with. You've had a lot of criticism from Southern Baptists about that. And then early last year, it would have been 23. We were going to hire them again. Only now they're going to be like the final say of investigatory processes for all Southern Baptists. I just was dumbfounded at that point. I was stupefied. And we had some meetings in Florida, and I began to call other pastors. I thought, maybe nobody sees it. Maybe I'm the only crazy guy. And I began to call pastors that, I would have been more aligned with, guys that I was considered friends, and they were all angry, like all of them. They were like, and I said, well, we got to say something. We got to do something. And we did make some noise about that and affected some change. Although the reality is, one of the things nobody's talking about is they were still paying Guidepost to run a hotline. And I don't know that they've ever publicly said they're not. I don't know if they are or they're not. I mean, today, I honestly don't know if we still are or not paying them. But there was in that article, somebody, when that whole thing went down, and this is a fascinating anecdote. We were having a conversation with somebody on the abuse reform implementation, who's a wonderful person, gentleman, brother in Christ. And we were trying to convince him, like, this is a really bad decision. And another pastor in our state said something that just hit me. He said, look, and they were like, it's just a tweet. And by the way, you'd be stunned how many convention leaders call me going, it's just a tweet. It's like buying a Coca-Cola. It's no big deal. And this other pastor said, imagine for a second that organization had posted a racist tweet with a Confederate flag. William, and I know they'd have been fired before sundown, and rightly so, right? We would have said, that is horrific, fire them. I don't care what the contract says, we're not working with you another day. And he looked at a brother on the task force and said, so tell me, why, we all know you'd have fired him if it were a racist tweet, but it's a rainbow colored tweet, and so it's okay. Why one and not the other? And and I know the answer to that. The answer to that is because one is culturally applauded and one is not.
Amen. And
the moment you connect that dot is the moment we have drifted. And there was a moment where I went, now I know we have. There is no way. I told another guy, there is no way on earth you can close your eyes and imagine Adrian Rogers giving a speech defending the hiring of a group that celebrates and affirms LGBTQ values. There is absolutely no way. He wouldn't have done it. And that was like, I thought, okay, we got to do something. I have a voice. I don't know if anybody will listen to me. I don't know if I got anybody left that will care what I have to say, but that's not my responsibility. I got to at least do something. And so I was talking to some guys, what can we do? And at some point, Mike decided he was going to run, and he knew it was an uphill climb. And, but he asked me, and I think I may have even volunteered. Like, we were talking, and I said, Mike, if you ran, I'd nominate you. I think I said that to a friend of his. I think somebody said, Mike may run. I said, I tell you, if he runs, if he wanted me to, I'd nominate him. Well, maybe I was hoping he wouldn't really want me to. I don't know. But he called me a few days later and said, I do want you to. And, I took that seriously. I prayed. I struggled with it. And Mike knows that. We talked a lot last spring. He was so patient and kind, because I don't think I'm a wimp. I don't think I'm a coward, but I just knew it would come at a cost. I knew that there would be people, and I hated it. I didn't, I've spent my life in this convention. I built deep friendships, and you just wonder what people are going to think and say. And I did struggle with it, to be honest with you. But in the end, I can tell you today, I'm so glad I did it. It's one of the things I do not regret a bit. I'm proud to know Mike Stone, and he'd have made a great president, by the way. So anyway, I just felt like I had to be part of, look, I can't go back. You learn things when you learn things. You see things when you see things. I can't change, 5 years ago. I can only say I saw it when I saw it. Some people saw it a lot sooner, and I applaud them. I thank them. There was people who saw things and spoke about things, including like critical race theory and some of the problems coming up long before I did. And I'm happy for them to say, I told you. I told Tom I was going to buy him a shirt last time I was with him. I said, I'm going to buy you a shirt that says, I told you so. And you can wear it to the Southern Baptist Convention. Somebody said, well, he said, well, if you'll walk around with me at the convention, that's what, and when I wear the shirt, that'll really get some stares. But he did. And there were a lot of guys who were out there saying things that a lot of us were slow to hear. And I'm sad to say some things I was slow to hear. And maybe sometimes when you're sitting in the seats of influence and power, it's kind of comfortable there. It feels good there. You feel affirmed there. And maybe it makes you a little hard to hear some of that that's coming from, it's coming from the edges. And you tend to dismiss that. And when you get knocked off center, like I got knocked off center, then maybe you start listening a little bit more. And maybe that's what happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, Willie. I think what you just said is right, and I think it's probably one of the, I've been in the Southern Baptist Convention for 13 years. I've been following it, more closely, really, over the last 5 years, and I think what you just said about being in the seats of power, muffling people's ears to legitimate criticism, and from what I can tell, and even through your story, it's that there's a way that there's a culture of leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention that I think is really unhealthy in many ways, where people feel like if they ever say anything critical or try to bring honest feedback or criticism of things that are going on, that all of a sudden that door will be closed to them. That seat won't be made available to them. I'll tell you, I've had some conversations with some people and I left that conversation thinking there are some entities that essentially function as like the mafia in Southern Baptist life. And that's really concerning. And one of the things we want to do at Center for Baptist Leadership in particular is have honest conversations about points of concern and share honest criticisms, but point to solutions and a better way forward, which I feel like is what we're doing here now, is trying to get to the better way forward. So you ended up nominating Mike Stone, and now here we are today. But what could you say about that? Will you talk to maybe, a 40-something-year-old Southern Baptist pastor who maybe he wants to climb the convention ladder, right? He wants to get into the system. What words of advice and counsel would you have? And also, what would you say to everybody listening? How can we work towards a convention with a healthier atmosphere for criticism and problem solving without it needing to be sort of almost this like awakening and side changing sort of thing?
Yeah. Institutions go through cycles. And it's a great question. And I want to say this, I know many of the leaders, some of them very, very closely, and consider dear friends, and to this day, even if maybe some of my views have changed. And they're not wicked people. I mean, I don't know any, wicked, I know what you meant when you said mafia, but there's nobody like that. There's nobody like, oh, let's do awful things. These are people trying to do good things, and they are in those positions because they really want to advance the Great Commission. I truly believe that. And maybe I'm a little naive on that, but I'd still believe that. The people I've known are good people with wanting to do the right thing. The problem in institutional life, and it can be true at Calvary, it can be true with any large institution, is it is possible to get a little isolated. And when people begin, every pastor has dealt with criticism. I've dealt with it. There are people that, get mad at us. Every pastor, I promise you, in the littlest church, the biggest church, has dealt with negative people, unregenerate people, recalcitrant, people that make your life hard. And it's just one of the things you have to sometimes deal with. And you learn sometimes not to take some of it too seriously. I mean, you have to survive. You get a letter from somebody and you go, hey, don't worry about that letter. That's just, he's been mad about everything since the Civil War. So don't worry about, he's just mad. But the problem is, if you're not careful, you can become a little too dismissive. Like, those are they're just upset. And like I had somebody said to me, like they said, well, if you become president, I would never talk about the Conservative Baptist Network. And I remember I didn't say this to anybody, but I thought it. And I later told Mike Stone, I said, I had already decided if I became president, one of the first things I was going to do was I was going to drive to where Mike Stone lives in Georgia and buy him a glass of iced tea. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, what are you mad about and how can I help? And I'm not going to push the guys in the CBN away, because I've gotten to know a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys are wonderful guys. They're not they don't want to burn the convention down. I want to sit down and go, what are you mad about and how can I help? I would want to go to Tom Askell. What are you mad at? How can I help? And of course, never got a chance to do that. But I think that's a good thing to do. I think when you have a convention that's as big as ours and as diverse as ours, you need to make sure you're hearing the voices of dissent. And yeah, some of them, there are going to be some people, let's be honest, they're just cranky and mad and have other agendas. But you need to listen to the things that you need to be humble enough. And we all need that. I need that. We need to be humble enough to hear the critics and not just dismiss them. Because what I have seen now is that there is a very serious a conservative renewal movement. I don't know what the percentage is. I don't know if it'll be in a majority in Indianapolis. I kind of hope so. I do hope so. But it's not an insignificant movement. It's a pretty significant movement. Like Mike Stone, I know, we only got about a third of the vote last year. And so it wasn't close. I thought it might be closer, but, it was an uphill climb against the sitting president. But somebody later said to me, look, think about it. A third of the people sitting in that convention said, of a sitting president who is everyone, is a nice person and all of that. Like, he hadn't done some huge, scandalous thing. But a third of the people were saying we need to go in a different direction in an off year. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that will be this year, but I do believe more and more pastors are saying, look, we're not mad. We don't want to burn the house down. We are not trying to accuse people of awful things. Most of them are good people trying to do good things, but there are some things that have gone off track. And we want you to listen to the conservative people in these churches and in these pews who are concerned about some of the things. I don't think the ERLC represents the rank and file Southern Baptist today. I absolutely do not. And I hate to get into that issue, but it certainly does not represent where I feel and where I think most of the people in our church would feel. And so you have to ask why. And you've got to invite people into conversations, and you've got to be more humble than to just defiantly give institutional speak and lawyerly answers that don't really give answers. I don't know if that answers the question, but we got to get the attention of people to say, hey, these people out there have a concern and it needs to be heard.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And so would you say now at this point, you say that the Southern Baptist Convention is, at least as it's currently been led, say over the last 6 to 10 years, I'm not sure where you want to draw the line exactly, we're not going in the right direction. We're not going in the Baptist direction, in the biblical direction, whether it's been on abuse reform issues that got hijacked and brought in other sort of ideologies, Me Too movement and other things. And now the fight over the proliferation of women pastors or on social justice ideologies. You're one of the guys who would say, I actually think there is a drift now, or actually, I'm not sure. I've changed my language on this, Willie. I've kind of stopped saying drift, and I've started saying we're being steered. It's not. It's not just a drift. We're being intentionally led in a direction that's really, quite frankly, alien to our conservative Christian, in particular, our Baptistic commitments. And you'd say, yes, now I see that that's happening.
Well, and I've used the word drift, but I understand what you're saying, because I do think, and again, I still might be more naive in this or more positive in this. I think a lot of people, I don't think the Southern Baptist Convention is even in its leadership and its institutions, is a place of liberals who need to be, changed. I still think most of them are conservatives. And I think most of our leaders are Bible-believing conservatives. I think we've allowed influences to push us in a direction. And there are worldly influences that push us in directions, and they don't seem dangerous at first until they do. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't see a push toward egalitarianism. I didn't. I even, ridiculed some people who may have thought that was happening. Like, that's not happening. And then all of a sudden you hear a lot of pastors who are talking, we have women pastors. We've always had women pastors. We're going to have women pastors. What are you going to do about it? And that's a shift. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Where did that come from? Well, it's been happening, but apparently it was kind of happening in a hidden way. And now it's out there full bore. So I do think there are some very real with drifts or whatever you want to call them that need to be corrected. I think they're correctable, because I think most Southern Baptist pastors are conservative. And by that, I'm not just using some, Johnny-come-lately label. I mean, they by that, I mean biblical fidelity and conviction about biblical moral issues. So I think most of them are conservative. And I think most of them want to gather to do Great Commission around clear doctrinal, unity. And I think we just have to inform them. I just think if they can awaken to see that some of this has happened, there's no shame. I think I would say this. There's no shame in waking up and saying, wow, I didn't see this happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a shame when the evidence is presented in you being stubborn and refusing to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shame. We've all been fooled at some point. Listen, everybody's made mistakes. Everybody's had blind spots. Everybody's, had something hit them that they didn't see coming. At least I have. There's no shame in going, hey, I missed this one. I was a little slow on it. And now I want to, kind of recalibrate. But there is shame when the evidence is there and you stubbornly don't look at it and you refuse. That's when you just keep the car driving till you go right off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And in this sexual abuse reform, if some of the things that have been bandied about ever do get done, like a database with people who have been accused but never been charged, never been convicted, if those things ever get done, I mean, it is an existential threat
mm-hmm.
to the financial institutional health of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that.
Yeah. Well, so let me try to go through a couple of maybe practical things here as we close this time out, because I mean, it's a fascinating story, Willie, because I appreciate your humility. And, I was on a podcast with John Harris yesterday, and I said that, I think that many of our institutional leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention seem to act as if forgiveness and grace don't exist at the institutional level, and that repentance and reconciliation is something that's not possible if you're a leader or if you've made a mistake. And as Christians, we just know that's not true. I know that so many of the quote unquote critics in the Southern Baptist Convention of things that have gone wrong and that maybe have legitimately gone wrong. We can think of critical race theory, Resolution 9. Yep. You've told me that you've watched By What Standard, and now you believe Tom on it. You believe we got played, on that, right? Yep. But we just want to see brothers like yourself say, you can put me in the critic camp. I've certainly been there. I'm sure that, but we just want to hear brothers like yourself say, you know what, actually, I missed this. And look, we might miss things too. There'll be opportunities for us to say we missed things and then have a chance to reconcile and join together to work for the good ends, which is not the destruction of the Southern Baptist Convention, but is the restoration of it. And so I think that's absolutely right. So practically speaking, we're 4 weeks to Indianapolis. You've mentioned a couple guys here, Tom Maskell, Mike Stone. So sort of who else would you say, if you're out there in Southern Baptist Convention, here are some brothers that you've been told have horns and tails, but I've gotten to get to know, and you should talk to them. You should talk to Tom Maskell. You should talk to Mike Stone. Who else?
Well, certainly those guys have been leaders. Tom Buck was involved in all this controversy, and that's part of the story. Tom and I have talked, and we had it was a very interesting conversation months later, and Tom and I have become friends. We probably don't see every issue eye to eye, but I've grown to respect him, and he and I've talked. We talk, somewhat frequently about various things. And, again, I've learned to appreciate his insight on some things. And again, he probably would disagree with me on others, but guys like that, here's the thing. Guys who have a prophetic bent, and by prophetic men, I'm using it in the case of they are going to call things out. They can be troublesome. Like, they're going to say things like they want to rock the boat a little bit. But that person is sometimes needed. I told somebody, when the other day, when Martin Luther, nailed the 95 Theses on the door, I'm sure there were some Roman Catholics going, hey, that is not the way to do this. He literally posted his complaints. Like, we need to handle our problems. Let's get behind closed doors and talk like men. And he put it out there publicly. And yet, look at what happened. So rather than dismiss the critic, and sometimes there are people who have said mean things and unkind things, and I'm not implying anybody in particular. I'm just saying that has happened. But here's what I learned. That happens on both sides. Yeah. And what I learned is the venom and the vitriol that has come out of the left side. They take a back seat to nobody. I promise you that, in some of the things that have been done and said. So, we've got some guys running now, that are at least, three of the five guys are supporting the law amendment. Clint Presley was, one of the first guys out of the gate supporting that. And Clint has been involved in a lot of leadership decisions at the convention, but I think as a strong guy, Dr. David Allen has said some very good things and has led at a very high level. And there are other guys. I'm just mentioning a few. You've got some strong leaders out there that I think understand some of the problems and could help correct some of the problems. So certainly, those are guys that I think can be listened to. I don't know all the ones, but
Sure.
but there are a lot of guys that I think if you dismiss somebody just because maybe you disagreed with them or you thought they were in a different tribe or a different camp, sometimes you go back and go, hey, what are they saying and why are they saying it? And then you come away going, you know what, maybe I don't agree with them on everything. Maybe this guy's reformed, I'm not reformed, or maybe this guy's, whatever. But you come away going, hey, they're saying some things that need to be addressed. The critical race theory is a perfect example. When it was first brought up, I thought, and I've talked to Tom about this, 2019, I was sitting in Birmingham when that resolution now was being debated late in the afternoon. Like, everybody's trying to go home and it comes up. And I remember thinking, I'm not 100% sure what this is all about. Like nobody has asked me about critical race theory. And I'm like, why are we talking about this? And I remember Tom made an amendment on the floor, and I voted for that amendment. And it got a pretty good number, but it didn't pass. Honestly, if that amendment had passed, we wouldn't have some of the problems in terms of our perception on critical race theory. It was a good amendment. But I thought, hey, this, I don't know. I remember joking that, hey, critical race theory, most Southern Baptists think you're talking about NASCAR. The critical race is, Daytona or Talladega, nobody's talking about this. Well, within a year, everybody in America was talking about it. Like everybody. The guy in the barbershop was talking about it. The taxi cab driver was talking about it. They saw it coming. And that's because they were well read. They were going to the conferences. They were talking, and some of them had been talking about it for a couple of years, honestly. And Tom told me later, I don't think he'd mind me saying, I said to him, I don't think most Southern Baptists knew what we were talking about. And he said, you're right, on the floor. He said, you're right. He said, now the committee knew what we were talking about. He said, because I was talking to them. But he said, you're right. Most of them didn't. And so, but I think now a lot of Southern Baptists know all about, there is no way in heaven today Southern Baptists would pass a resolution that describes critical race theory as a helpful analytical tool. There is absolutely no way that they would do it. And you know why? Because they now know what we're talking about. They've seen it. And so there's kind of been a wake-up call nationally. And as I said, some guys saw it a lot sooner. There's no shame in saying, hey, I didn't see it as a thing. Now I do. Man, I'm sorry. I wish I'd seen it sooner, but I can't change the past. All I can do is tell you where I stand today, and I want to keep learning. And we're always reforming the church, right? Forever reforming. We're always being reformed to God's word, God's truth. And so if we're not humble enough to be corrected, then what does that say about us? Yeah. I hope I never outgrow that. We need to be, I'm sure there are more things I have to learn. So I certainly have learned some things over the last couple of years, and I certainly stand with those. I'm not angry. I don't want to burn the house down. I'm not trying to get anybody fired. I do think, though, we need a conservative renewal. I think we need a conservative renewal very much like what we saw back in the 80s and 90s, where we come back to who we are and to our mission, and that mission that is rooted in doctrinal clarity and doctrinal conviction. I really do think that, and maybe we're close to that. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So on that point, obviously one of the most important sort of conservative votes that we're going to take this year in Indianapolis will be on the ratification of the law amendment. And so where do you stand on the law amendment? Do you support it? Do you think it's important, necessary for the Southern Baptist Convention? What would you say to messengers coming to Indianapolis about the law amendment?
Yeah, I'm going to vote for the law amendment. I think it's what the law amendment does essentially is it pulls an article out of our statement of faith which, as we've often said, statements of faith are statements of what most Baptists believe at a given time. And, there's that language about churches had to be closely aligned, which meant, there's a little wiggle room there. So it pulls a conviction about complementarianism and puts it in the bylaws and says, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're going to be. And a lot of people are opposed to it. I don't know. It's a pretty high threshold. We got to get 2/3, but I'm going to vote for it. To me, it comes down to two things. And when you look at the critics of it, first of all, the criticism is not necessary. You hear that all the time. Well, we already have the mechanism to deal with that. But if it's not necessary, why is there so much controversy about it? Amen. Like, if it's not necessary, everybody'd be going, oh, you can do it if you want to. It's not necessary, but we all basically agree. I would say this, it is necessary because what are you got to pull out and look at the 10,000 foot view here. What are the big issues of our time? Biblical authority, is that a big issue? Absolutely. The Bible's pretty clear on that. And number two, the role of gender, the truth about gender. Is that an issue right now? Like, that's a huge issue right now. So I do think it's necessary for us in this moment to say, okay, this is a conviction of who we are as a people going forward. And then the second thing is I hear, it's going to be harmful. It's going to unleash a army of rabid, hyper fundamentalists going to be coming after every woman that works on a staff, and they're going to be coming after every leader. And I don't think that's true. There are plenty of women who serve in staff positions that have leadership and influence that are not pastors. I have women that serve on our staff in important positions of organization, but they are not pastors. Our church is clear about that. They're not pastors. They are not elders, overseers, pastors of the church. If people want to come after that, well, that'll be a fight for another day. But I really don't think that's going to happen. And when people say, oh, no, we're going to go off the edge. Let me ask you something. How many churches, institutions, schools, Christian organizations, how many do you know that have gone off the edge on the right? Like, they have rabid, hyper legalistic fundamentalists. Like, give me the list. How many universities, how many Christian ministries have gone off the slippery slope on the right? I don't know. Maybe you've got a couple. I'd have to think hard. Now, flip the question around. How many have gone off the slope on the left?
That's right.
Like, how many Christian denominations, institutions have gone off the left? The slippery slope seems to be most slippery on one side of that mountain, because we could fill a notebook of the organizations that have slipped to the left. That's the slippery slide of this slope, not the right. It's the left. And I know the Southern Baptist Convention is not going to vote on the rainbow agenda. We're not where the United Methodists are. We're not going to vote about that. But we are going to make a decision about the law amendment. And decisions become directions.
Amen.
And directions become destiny. And you move incrementally until it becomes unstoppable. And by the time the Southern Baptist Convention does vote on a rainbow, agenda, it's probably too late. It's by the time you're voting on that kind of stuff, you're gone. Like, you're just trying to hold off defeat at that point. The key, you don't wait until you go over the cliff to build the guardrail. And so the time to build the guardrail is right now. This is an issue. We're at a fork in the road, and we're all going to come home from the convention, and there's going to be one or two headlines. Headline is either going to be Southern Baptists oppose women pastors and restate that, or Southern Baptists keep the door open on women pastors. I'm telling you, I know that may not be exactly what we're voting on, but the guy on the back row is going to read one of those two headlines. And you get to decide, you and I get to decide which headline he's going to read. We either, keep the door open, and if that happens, we're going to be debating this for the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. The only way to deal with this is to say, this is what we have said in our statement of faith. It's who we are. It's one of our biblical convictions. We know we have brothers and sisters in other churches and other places may see it different. But we believe the Bible is clear on this, and this is who we want to be and who we have been. It's Baptistic, it's biblical, even more important. And so I think, yes, we gotta pass this amendment. Let's put the guardrail up before we're voting on things we don't want to be voting on. That's what I would say.
That was incredibly well said. You said decisions are directions and directions are destiny. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I do find it troubling when, I've seen some actors in Southern Baptist life point at what happened to the United Methodists and say, well, we're not doing that. So what do you mean there's no liberal drift? And it's like, well, just because we're not at the destination doesn't mean that I can't discern the direction we're headed in and whether it's going to take us there or not. Well, Willie, I hope you make it to a microphone and give that same speech on behalf of the law amendment on the convention floor. But let me bring that back around to sort of the topic that launched this whole conversation, which is on sexual abuse reforms. First, to point out a connection in terms of how you said that whole movement has really been hijacked with a whole lot of other things. Well, one of those has been opposition to the law amendment. One of the things that I've seen most repeated by the survivor community is Southern Baptists can't care for those who have been abused, but they can do a witch hunt on women pastors, which when you combine them like that, you realize that there's something in there that is allergic to defending sound doctrine, particularly on gender roles, because of how this is connected. But what do you think the Southern Baptist Convention should do? What's the future of abuse reform? What should we do with ARITF? What do you think about this proposed independent abuse response commission? What would be your message to Southern Baptists on the future of abuse reforms in the SBC?
Well, it's kind of hard to untangle the barbed wire. We've kind of, I think, messed up our opportunity. We had a great opportunity to deal with a very real societal sinful issue. And pastors always are dealing with issues of sin, right? We want to pastor. We want to protect. We had a real opportunity. We had the attention of Southern Baptists, whether we liked the way it came or not. And we could have focused on preventing abuse, training churches, and you said the big three: preventing churches, training churches, preventing abuse, training churches, protecting and responding to survivors in a positive way. We kind of have muffed that because we've gotten involved in all these other issues. And the investigation, the executive committee, actually it got off track. It got off track. We got into other things. We made it about feminist politics instead of about really protecting children and helping our churches. And it's going to be hard to unwalk it back, but we can always do the right thing. Never too late to do the right thing. The right thing is what the right thing is from the beginning. And by the way, I haven't read all the material coming from the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force. I know they've talked about a toolbox and for training. I hope that's a good one. I haven't read the material, but that would be wonderful. If there were a way to say, hey, we are going to have a laser focus on giving churches the tools they need to do the right thing, to protect people, to prevent abuse, to respond appropriately, talk about the ethics and how to respond appropriately, all those things. We can still do that. The Abuse Reform Commission, I think, is a bad idea. I got so many questions on that. I don't even know where to start. It doesn't even seem legal to me. I'm not a lawyer. I told somebody, imagine the deacons of Calvary or a finance committee at Calvary. A few of those guys go start another separate nonprofit organization and then vote to move Calvary's money into that corporation that they themselves purport to control. I don't even think that's legal. I don't know, but it can't be legal. You could set up a corporation and then say, now we're going to go ask Southern Baptists to fund that. Okay, that's fine. Put it out there. What are you afraid of? That they'll say no? Like, just set it up and say, hey, we did this and here's what it's going to do. Now, would you be willing to fund that? That's the way that should have been handled. But I still think it's a bad idea. I don't think you need to put this in an abuse reform commission. I think you're just going to continue to have this movement that is way off track. We need to focus on equipping churches in all the ways that we said. I think it's probably time, no offense intended, but to shut down the abuse reform. We don't need another year of this. They're kicking the can down the road. It's time to just say, hey, thank you for what you've done. Hopefully they've put together some good things. Now let's hope that we can have some leaders, make sure state convention. Imagine if every state convention said, here's the goal of how many churches would be trained. And here are churches that have agreed to certain ethical response. We could have done so much.
Encourage the use of Ministry Safe.
Oh, we could have, easily. And others who are like that. But yeah, we could have done so much in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hard for the same people to do that now, I think. A lot of trust has been broken. But I do think we could find a way to kind of land that plane. You're never going to make people, the sooner you recognize that there are some people you will never make happy, the freer you're going to be. And I don't want to be unkind, but for some people, ruin was the goal from the beginning, not redemption. And the sooner you realize that, there's not going to be any absolution from a secular priest.
Amen.
That never any absolution. They just, so do the right thing, do it in a biblical way. And then let the criticism come. Let's get back and focus on what we do. Our churches are churches that overwhelmingly care about people and want to do the right thing. And I tell you one quick story. I don't know how much time we have, but when I was a 21-year-old pastor, I started pastoring when I was 20. A kid, a little country church, Door, Alabama. I was 21 and been married maybe a couple months. And a 15-year-old girl came to my office and said that her stepfather was raping her. I was 21. I've just been married a few months. I didn't even know that sort of thing happened. She came with her aunt, and what do you want? You know, they didn't know where to go. They went to their Southern Baptist church in a little country community. I'd never read one book, been to one class on it, never probably watched a documentary on it. I hardly knew such a thing happened in the world. But I instinctively knew two things in that moment. One, you got to try to help this young lady. And number two, you're going to tell the truth. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to try to work for justice. And I called three people the next day. Sheriff, of course, even though we hadn't been taught to do that in those days. But I called the sheriff to go, what am I supposed to do? They hardly knew what to do. But I also, the same morning, called two Southern Baptist leaders. One was a professor at my school. I had just graduated. And another was my pastor, who had been my mentor. Both of them told me the same thing. Call the police. And try to help this family, but nobody said, cover this up. Nobody said, you got to figure this out. This is, you got to handle it internally. And we did. And by the way, that guy got arrested. That stepfather got arrested. He ended up going to jail. One of the rare cases. I remember going to the trial. And my wife and I had to leave our house for a couple nights because we were afraid of our safety, Now, here's why I tell you that story. That woman is in her 50s somewhere. I haven't talked to her in 40 years. I don't know. I hope she's had a good life. But if somebody talked to her today and said, hey, tell me about the hardest time of your childhood or the darkest moment, I hope and think, and I haven't talked to her in 40 years, I think she would say, I went to my Southern Baptist church. I didn't know where. It's a little Southern Baptist church. I didn't know where else to go. And they believed me and they helped me. Now, let me tell you why I told you that story. I believe there are thousands of stories like that.
Amen.
Thousands of stories. And those people aren't online. Those people aren't making a lot of noise. But that's who Southern Baptist people are. And it bothers me that it has been caricatured that Southern Baptist people are somehow overlooking abuse or somehow wanted to cover abuse. Look, there have been some terrible examples of where that has been mishandled, as you and I have said. But overwhelmingly, I believe Southern Baptist people hate sin. They hate abuse. They hate sexual abuse. And I believe almost every pastor would have a story like I just told you. And that's the story that needs to be told. Our churches are the place where we tell the truth and where we help people. And if some churches have failed, I'm very sorry about that. We need to help them do better. But caricaturing our movement as somehow soft on abuse is absolutely a lie. It's an absolute lie. And I'm pushing back on it because I believe the overwhelming number of Southern Baptist people are good people and pastors are good pastors. They want to help, and turning our guns on them was the wrong thing to do. And that's exactly what we did. That's exactly what we did. We should have united them to solve a problem. And we turned the guns of power on our own people and blamed them for a problem that they did not cause.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Willie. That's powerful. And I think you're absolutely right. And as that point about power is really fascinating, and it's sad. And it's that the way you connected some of the more of the way the abuse reform movement was hijacked was to undo the conservative resurgence, which it's very ironic because many in the survivor community and those advocating with them, they accuse those in the conservative resurgence and those still trying to defend biblical doctrine in the Southern Baptist Convention today as just being interested in power. They just want to control things. It was all about control. And yet what's really happening, even as John Whitehead detailed so clearly in the podcasts I did with him, which is that there was a group of people who just wanted control and the power of the executive committee. They made a bunch of promises they shouldn't have made and couldn't have kept. And when they finally got the power, they turned back around and said, well, actually, we can't really do anything different than that old group could do, but now we're in charge, so trust us. And so really, I think what's happening here is that there are those who want to control the Southern Baptist Convention to have the power in it, to move us in a liberal direction and to undermine our commitment to the Bible and to true justice. And they are accusing the people trying to keep the convention biblical as being the ones who want power. In fact, there's a word for this in sort of the conversation about wokeness, which is called the iron law of woke projection, which is to always accuse others of what you are doing yourself. And so it's fascinating, but brother, that was very encouraging. We're at an hour and a half. So thank you for your time. I think you've told your story well. For me to try to summarize it here really is that, you have had, you've not gotten woke, but you've sort of woken up. And you've had a Willy Rice awakening as you've realized that at least the way that the Southern Baptist Convention is operating right now, that there were people who you were told were the bad guys who have actually been the good guys and good friends to you. And there are people who you thought were the good guys who maybe they are good guys, right? But they've been co-opted and they've been, as Tom Maskell put it, they've been played. And then maybe we do have some bad actors out there who are influencing this. And over the last few years, you've had a change of heart and you're willing to share that story and tell people, hey, I was wrong. I was wrong on abuse reform issues. I was wrong on what a serious threat critical race theory actually has been. And I'm humbly telling you guys that I've changed my perspective and inviting others to do the same. Is that a fair summary of our conversation?
That's a fair summary of it. Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Willie. I appreciate it. And let me just sort of give you sort of any closing words here. What do you want the takeaway? What's your hope for the Southern Baptist Convention? Are brothers? Would you welcome brothers reaching out to you? Maybe folks who
sure,
who haven't quite connected the dots. That was a theme you touched on a lot, was connecting the dots. Are you happy to help other people connect the dots?
Of course. And, I've talked to a lot of guys who are connecting the dots also already. And so I'm certainly happy to talk about that, be an encouragement where I can. Again, I don't know what, influence, what voice I have, but I'm glad to just use it and at least just share my story, my perspective. Again, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be bitter, but I don't think I am. It's just I've been through some things. And as you said, I preached a message a couple months ago in our own church called Waking Up in a Woke World. I ripped that title off of somebody else, but it was a good title. And out of, Romans that tells us to wake up. They woke up the hours late. And a lot of us need to wake up in a woke world and realize, okay, there's some things that have been happening around us that maybe we didn't see as quick as some other people. But you know what? If we can see them now, that's a good thing. And let's keep the Southern Baptist Convention strong on the, I grew up in the conservative churches, and I can remember the moderates would say every time, don't worry about doctrine. We're mission. Don't worry about doctrine. And the great conservative leaders, Rogers and Stanley and Draper, the great conservative leaders were guys who said, it's not one or the other, it's both. And by the way, they were the great evangelistic leaders of the day. It's one of the ways the conservative surgeons won. They were the great evangelistic leaders. But they knew that you don't have real, true biblical evangelism. And you don't have great evangelism and a great impact if you don't preach the Bible as true as the Word of God. And so there are a lot of issues that are being out there, and hopefully guys are seeing that some of the things they've been told aren't necessarily the way they are, and hopefully we'll get on a better track here in the near future.
Amen. I hope so too. And for those listening to this, if you're connecting the dots, please come join us in Indianapolis. Right next month, June 11 to 12 is our annual meeting. We have to ratify the law amendment. We have to adjudicate whatever the future is on abuse reform in the Southern Baptist Convention. These are things that we need messengers to weigh in on. John Whitehead said this last night in a Twitter space we're hosting. He said that the messengers and the lay members, the churches, have to be the watchdogs of the Southern Baptist Convention. The institutions can't watchdog themselves. That's not how it works, because we're a glorious, messy, beautiful Baptist democracy. And that means that the people need to show up and do the work. So I'll be there. I know Willie will be there. And Willie, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? How can they connect with you?
Well, our website is calvary.us. There are ways to get a message to us there. And that's probably the best way, is just tell people our website, calvary.us. And certainly that's probably the best thing to give them. And there's some emails, I think, in there that would get to me. And I'm not too hard to reach. So would love to connect with any pastors that I can, and certainly any way I can be an encouragement. I'm glad to do it.
Well, thank you, Brother Willie. This has been a huge encouragement to me. And I just want to thank you for your humility, for your courage, and for your willingness to set an example, to speak the truth, and to help bring other Southern Baptists along to see the reality of things that are happening with a constructive vision for how to have a better path forward. I'm deeply blessed by it, brother. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the real privilege, William. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
The Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed, the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.